Welcome to Phonogenics 101, a Riotboy production hosted by Jeremy Gloff. The podcast where people who love music discuss albums track by track. Please hit subscribe, and if you'd like to support this podcast, patreon.com/Jeremy Gloff or Venmo @Jeremy Gloff. And now, on to the music. Well, welcome everybody to Phonogenics Season 2. Tonight we're about to start a brand new journey. We have a brand new panel here, which I will probably grow a little bit as we go forward. But tonight, we are going to begin discussing the discography of the band Blondie. Blondie was my first favorite band when I was in kindergarten. All the other kids were bringing toys to show and tell, and I was bringing Blondie records. The Best of Blondie was my first record I ever owned. My cousin bought it for me when I was 5, and the rest is history, I guess you could say. But anyway, thanks to my Patreon subscribers for paying the fee for uploading these. And thanks to the subscribers, and thank you to Blondie for coming out with some of the best music that's ever been made. So I have some these are not new friends of mine, but they're new to the Phonogenics universe. And I'm going to introduce them. And if you just want to tell about yourself, where you're from, your story, and what your history is with Blondie, Scott Levan Miller. I pronounced it right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you might be the first person who ever said it right the first time. So hi, Scott, right here in Tampa, Florida, along with Jeremy and Daniel, I presume. Tampa? Mm-hmm. I didn't ask really yet. Yeah. So I'm a musician myself, play these things, all these things stacked up and hanging on the wall behind me. But let's get to Blondie. I'm of the age, Jeremy, where as I was aware, like becoming aware of FM radio and having a transistor radio in my bedroom, is exactly the same time that Blondie was blowing up and taking over things. So it was just omnipresent, during my earliest years of just turning on, a top 40 radio station and hearing all these things. So it's in the earliest part of the formation of DNA. Although wasn't like a deep album person back then, but also just, as videos came on, there they were, groundbreaking in every way. And of course, I've always kind of into Debbie Harry too. So, teenage guy and all those things for me.
How could someone not? I think Debbie Harry was probably one of the most attractive human beings, mentally and physically, to ever grace this planet. Still.
And when that voice comes out of her mouth, it's the full manifestation of beauty. So, yeah, that's my start.
All right, and I'm going to introduce somebody that I met in Buffalo, New York in 1996 when we played a show together at Stimulant's Coffee House. And here we are, almost 30 years later, still friends and still doing music. No, none of us are in New York anymore. Daniel Cartier.
Hello. Yes, I'm Daniel Cartier, and I'm a huge Blondie fan from like a very little kid. I know I told you this story before, but like I actually had a lot of personal, like I've met Debbie Harry. I actually performed with her, which was really crazy. My first New York show ever was performing a Patti Smith song with Debbie Harry at Jackie 60, which was like so crazy. Like, I mean, it was like a dream come true, but I didn't even realize it. So I grew up listening to her. Like, I mean, like I was a child, I was born in 1969. So like in 1979, like when Heart of Glass was #1, I was like 10 years old. And so I was just obsessed with disco and, like Donna Summer and everything. And then Heart of Glass came out. And that's the first song I heard, I mean, I didn't hear the rest of their music until later on because I was just a kid listening to the radio. And so like, if you were a kid in suburbia, that's probably the first song you were going to hear from them is Heart of Glass, because that's the thing that just kind of like pushed them over the edge and made them like huge global superstars. But after that, she was everywhere from like 1979 to like the early 80s, like tons of number one hits, like Rapture, you know, Hanging on the Telephone, Call Me, Tide is High, you know. And then I started like listening to all their albums and I became really obsessed. But I vividly remember Heart of Glass hitting number one, and Casey Kasem. It's like, this is Casey Kasem counting him down. And so then like me and my friends were like dancing around my friend's front yard to like Heart of Glass because it was number one. And so then years later, then I got like into punk rock and everything and had mohawks and all that stuff all through the 80s. But I always loved Blondie. Like, they were one of my favorite bands of all time. And so when I moved to New York in the early, like 1991, the very first place I played, like above ground, because I started playing in the subway. The very first place I played above ground was this nightclub, Jackie 60. And they were like, oh, because there was a Patti Smith tribute. The people who threw the party, Johnny and Chi-Chi, found out that I was a big Patti Smith fan. And so they were like, oh, do you want to come and play, you know, at this, we're doing a big Patti Smith tribute. And I was like, oh my God, yes, because she's another one of my favorite singers. And so they're like, oh, and could you back up Debbie? Like, Debbie wants to sing a song. And I didn't know who Debbie was. Like, I had no idea who they were talking about. And so I'm like, oh, sure. They're like, because I was going to do Redondo Beach. And so they're like, well, she wants to do Free Money. And so I'm like, okay, cool. And so I learned Free Money, and I already knew Redondo Beach because I played it all the time. And so like I showed up and they're like, yeah, we'll come downstairs. We'll like introduce you. You guys can go into a broom closet, literally, and like work out what you're going to do. So I go into this broom closet and there's this woman in there wearing a brunette wig, and she's dressed up like Patti Smith from the Horses album cover. Like, she has like the white shirt with the little tie and everything. And I'm like, oh, that's cute. She's dressed up like Patti Smith. And so they leave us in there and she starts talking. And all of a sudden I'm like, and it's a tiny little broom closet. I'm talking like, it's like 5 feet by like 5 feet. I mean, it's like really tiny. I've like barely enough for me to hold my guitar and like talk to this lady. And I'm like, oh my God, this is Debbie Harry. Like, Debbie is Debbie Harry. Like, and I'm like in this closet with her. And so I just like kind of flipped out and I like told her my dorky story of like, oh my God, I was 9 years old and Heart of Glass was number one. And we were dancing around my friend Jim Plummer's front yard to like Casey Kasem's American Top 40. And she was so gracious and nice about it. And she was so cool. And then like I saw her a ton of times after, like all through the 90s while I lived in New York, and she would like say hello to me and she remembered my name. And I just was like, and we got to perform that night together. We like, I sang Redondo Beach and then she came up and we sang Free Money, and it was just, and then she like strangled me. Like, she pretended to strangle me because I guess Patti Smith would always do that to Lenny Kaye. And so, I don't know, it's just this great New York moment. And that was my first time playing like above ground, like out of the subway. And so, yeah, it's a really lovely memory. And then later on, I met Richard Goderer, who, you know, produced this album we're going to talk about. So, yeah, Blondie is just, they're it. Like, they're like, if I had to, like, if somebody held a gun to my head, like, I don't know why they would, but if they did and said, like, pick your favorite 10 bands, they would definitely be one of them. So that's my little deal.
And now you're not in Tampa, you're in Tennessee, right?
I'm in Tennessee with my lovely partner, Corey. This is him right here. He doesn't wear dresses all the time, but he's wearing a dress.
I love it.
And then my lovely dogs. I rescue handicapped dogs. I have 4 handicapped dogs that I live with.
My Debbie Harry New York City story is, I feel like every time I used to go to Mr. Black's. Was that the name of the place?
Yeah.
Yeah. So every time I went to I'd go to town, play a show, and we'd go dancing at Mr. Black's, and everyone would be like, oh, Debbie just left. So I always like just missed her. Oh, she was just on the dance floor. So she always like left right before I got to Mr. Black's. So that's my near miss with Debbie Harry. But going back to my first memories, I I grew up in a family without much money, so my mom used to clean houses, and I remember the songs I remember is Heart of Glass on the radio, and then I remember when Dreaming came out as the first single from Eat to the Beat. So I remember those songs. Then, of course, Auto American with Rapture and Tide is High. But my earliest memory, of course, is also Heart of Glass. Like that song in '78, I guess I would have been 3 years old, but I do remember it being everywhere. And I remember the radio edit. They took out the word ass and just like had the radio edit because it was the '70s. But yeah, that's also my earliest memory. My cousin Kevin bought me the Best of Blondie for my Christmas present. And then I started collecting records in first grade. So there was a store in my hometown, Phonogenics, New York, called Record Giant. So I bought Parallel Lines. On the Best of Blondie, it showed on the back cover like what album each song was from. So I had to collect all the albums.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
Yep.
I
So
have
I got
set around here somewhere in a drawer somewhere. The best of.
that was an iconic best of. Like that's almost as essential as the Stew albums. But my memory about this first album we're gonna discuss is this one was harder to find. This was never on back before Amazon and eBay, and you had to drive. I had to drive an hour. There's a store called Record Theater in Buffalo. So if I wanted a bigger selection of music, I had to drive. Well, I couldn't drive at 6 years old. My cousin would drive me. And this first Blondie album, I remember there was a store in Buffalo called Play It Again Sam's. So this was in stock. I bought the first album, and I remember breaking it on the school bus. Like I took it to school for show and tell, and it broke. And I'm like, oh no, this album's the hardest one to find. So I must have gone to Buffalo and got it again because I replaced it. But I just remember breaking this album, and I was heartbroken. So
you still have that second copy?
yes, we're.
I thought you would.
Yeah. So there's my other copy. So yeah. So Scott, do you have any coming into Blondie stories you want to share before we go to?
So it's interesting. Yeah, I was listening and I had to go back and kind of search the timeline and think about it. And really, and I'm only a year older than you. So I was born in '68. So I was thinking I was much older than everyone. But, and one way or another with that guitar riff, I mean, I remember that. That's actually somehow, and I'm from Pensacola, and we were always 5-10 years behind the rest of the country in like anything. Like 50 years behind the rest of the country now. The time kept growing. But that's for another podcast. And yeah, no, I remember that at the skating rink. I remember, actually, I'm not sure. I'm sure it was, but I really remember that song first was the one, either at like a little school dance or something. And yeah, that for me, it started there. But yeah, all the things you said, and I know it's not on the album we're talking about, but recently discovering the original take on Heart of Glass, which was Once Had a Love.
Oh yeah,
something like that. The title, like a deep track on the reissue of the second or third album.
Third.
I forget where they threw it in their third album. Yeah, but that's not this album. But yeah, I like I said, always something that I loved everything I knew about them. Had greatest hits, cassette, and then recently have said, as I like to do with a lot of bands, recently have said, there's something really special there. I want to dive in. I want to know who wrote what. I want to know what their influences were. I want to know the story. I want to know how they came to even get noticed and all. I know a little bit about, that New York scene and all, but, so starting to kind of find out, and it made a lot of things make sense. And I don't want to take anything away from where you're going with the album, but, looking into the kind of 50s, 60s retro thing that they were initially. I think that's always an interesting story with any band. They start out trying to be some of their idols or something, and then they don't do that. If they're good, they become their own thing. But most people do tend to start out kind of trying to be someone that they like, and then their own. If you're great like them, your own thing comes out of it. But yeah, one way or another, that was definitely, I'm kind of a guitar guy, kind of a guitar nut. And so any song that opens up like that, I'm in.
Well, cool. So a precursor before we start the podcast, because sometimes people get a little nasty in the comments. We are not experts. At least I'm not an expert. I don't even do the research. I don't study the history. I feel like that's all on Wikipedia. If anyone does know the history and they want to share anything, please do. And if anyone wants to join the podcast that has more tidbits or historical things, that's awesome. But what I'm bringing is my life experience, my heart, and my opinion of the songs. So what everyone brings to the table is what they bring. More people may join, but this is all I got. And this is an album I love, so I'm excited to talk about it. So let's dive in. Blondie, the first album. This was released on an independent label, correct? Private stock?
Yes.
Blondie, the formation of Blondie is detailed a lot in Debbie Harry's book, which I recently read. And why can't I think Face It? Is that the name of it? Face. Anyway, it's amazing. It was a great book. So if you want to hear the history of how the band started, it's in Debbie's book. Does anyone know any of the history of this album? Daniel, I know you know about Richard producing.
Well, I know that they were really going towards, and it was already mentioned, like that it was kind of more. I know it's the one of the albums that Debbie Harry has said that like they didn't really want to get pigeonholed in like this retro, like, because this album really does have, like, of all their albums, like it has like the most kind of almost like a garage, like a 1960s garage band type of like vibe to it. You know, it's much more lo-fi than the other albums,
right?
And kind of has like and it does have a retro feel. Like it's like a lot of it has like a lot of almost like this like Shangri-La's type of girl group, like 1960s retro vibe. And it's not that the band didn't like that type of music. They obviously, everybody likes that type of music, but that's not really what they're going for. And so I know that in a lot of interviews, she would bring up the fact that they didn't really want to be considered like a retro throwback band, like that. She considered herself like they were a new wave band, I do think the other thing that's funny about, well, I guess we'll get into that with the when we start talking about the different tracks, but a lot of foreshadowing tracks to come.
Yeah.
All right, Barry did join us, so Barry, welcome. I'm so glad you could make it.
It's nice to be here. I'm going to listen in. I'm going to mute you. There's a lot of noise here.
Do you want to, I'm recording. Do I tell a little introduction? You're a big part of the Blondie universe. So do you care to share anything about your story?
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about me. Back in the 70s, very early on, I used to hold up the Blondie records and look at them and stare into them and say out loud, "I want to know you." And I actually did that. I didn't meet them until 1990, but it was a result of a fanzine that I did called Fan Mail from 1987 to 1993. I did 15 issues. And, we became friends after we met. I sent a copy of my latest issue backstage before I had even met them. And I had a little note and asked if I could meet them. And their sound engineer, who later went on to work for Bob Dylan for 20 years, he came out and got me, put his arm around me, and the venue security was like, stop, he doesn't have a pass, and he didn't care. And he dragged me back there and into the dressing room and plopped me down on the couch and points at me and goes, "This is the guy that did the newsletters." And they put me on the guest list for the rest of the tour, and then we became friends. So that's kind of my story, and we've been close ever since.
And Barry, I met you because I got a CD from you, I think, The Deprivation. And that's how we became friends.
Producer's cut. Yeah, that was the Deprivation producer's cut. I made that at Chris's request long ago. It was supposed to be done in '93 in England, but I got ripped off by a very good friend of mine who I guess needed the money more than he needed my friendship and loyalty to the band. And I paid for it again in 1994. and you probably got it from me in '94, unless you bought it online.
Yeah, I don't even remember. Collecting is a hazy fog of
I
money
know
just
how
flying out
that
the window.
is.
Well, cool. So as I was saying, we're going to talk about the album track by track. If anyone has any historical anecdotes they want to share, that's awesome. If anyone just wants to talk from the heart about what they think of the song, there's no format. There's nothing but the music. So yeah, we're about to dive into track one.
All right, that sounds good. I think I'm just going to listen in unless somebody has a specific question. I don't really know how to use this application. I don't know how to mute myself, and I don't know how many people are here or anything. I don't know what to do at all.
Okay. Well, yeah, have a seat, take a listen. If you want to jump in and add anything, feel free to.
Okay.
So before we go into the first song, we need to talk about this album cover. Talk about iconic from the very beginning. When I was 6 years old and I saw this, look at that back cover. I mean, that is attitude right there. And I will share something with you guys. 70s Jimmy Destry, the keyboard player, is, if I could have any crush, it would be Jimmy Destry in the 70s. If I could go in a time machine and be a female. So there's my little secret, you guys.
Secret's being revealed tonight.
Yeah, but like everything about this just to me screams like cool. The font, the black t-shirts. What an introduction here. Do you guys have anything to say about the cover before we move into the music?
It's a classic.
I think it's interesting. Of course, she's at the front. If there's someone more prominently figured, that makes sense. And if I'm not mistaken, in the very middle is the husband, ex-husband. I'm not sure where all that's at. Am I getting my players right?
Ex-boyfriend. Yeah, Chris.
Ex-boyfriend.
Yeah.
And also a key figure in songwriting for the band.
Yep.
So it's interesting, although I think about these things. Although she's clearly, not obstructed view at all. He's got this kind of powerful center right in the light, dead center, not, someone's in front of him, but he's just dead focused. I don't know. I kind of look at these things and think everyone was thinking about where their spot was in that little lineup when they lined up, and he's got this very centered position in it.
And Barry, just to give you a little background, Daniel and I have been fans since the 80s, and Scott's kind of just really diving into Blondie now. So we kind of have a lot of opinions coming from different angles, which is pretty cool.
Some stupid things, in other words.
Nothing is stupid. Also notable on this album is Gary Valentine is on the album. He would only be on the debut album and then contribute a song to the second album. And I'm saying a lot of things from memory, so if I ever get a historical fact wrong, you guys can virtually punch me in the head and be like, shut up, Jeremy. All right. So the album opens with Debbie talking. The song was originally called Sex Offender, but the label told them they had to change it to Ex Offender. But this song is so fucking good. Like, so something we do in the other Phonogenics podcast is each song, we give it the rating before we talk about it. The thumbs up, sideways, or thumbs down. I definitely give Ex Offender a thumbs up. And honestly, just to save everyone a lot of time, I'd probably give every song on this album a thumbs up. I'd probably give every song on the first 5 Blondie albums a thumbs up. But yeah, who wants to jump in talking about Ex Offender?
Remember rights, and then you say, "Let's go and nothing more." I just want to start. I always just start singing it. It's one of my favorite songs on the album. It's really catchy. It has I like how she it's just a really great song,
Yeah.
It's a great way to start off the album.
And she was saying in her book, wasn't it kind of about Gary Valentine's troubles with somebody underage?
That I do not know.
Okay.
That is actually correct.
So yeah, that's a little background there. This is such a what an iconic way to start a music career with this banging freaking song, man. And what's it called? A farfisa organ? Is that how you say it? Jimmy
Destry is playing a farfisa.
Farfisa, okay.
Yeah.
And to me, his keyboard playing is such a delight on this album. I mean, it's retro but still modern for the times. Scott, what do you think of this song?
I think it's a good, just judging by the beat and the drive, it's a good kickoff to an album. That's the way I would want to do it.
And I also love that it's like kind of a, like we said, a girl group throwback, but not singing about something they would have sang back in the 50s.
Right. It's got that feel. Yeah. It's
got the feel, but it's definitely got that 70s mentality. All right. And Barry, do you want me to call on you for the songs, or do you want to just jump in at your leisure?
Yeah, I think I'll jump in as I have some ideas. I did have one thing. You were talking about Jimmy Destry. I'm a huge fan of Jimmy Destry, especially his writing. His playing is phenomenal as well, but I really think he's one of their best writers. And I never had met him until the Blondie reunion. So I'd only seen Blondie one time in the original. And obviously, I didn't meet them till 1990, but didn't meet Jimmy Destry till 1997 at their first gig. And one of the things about him is that I always thought that he could probably hear what a song would sound like if Debbie did the song. And I got the opportunity to ask him that question, and he confirmed that my suspicion was correct.
Yeah, he definitely writes a really good hook. And Scott, I don't know if you looked at the liner notes, but it is a lot of different people can, Chris and Debbie are some of the main songwriters, but sometimes some of the other members would chip in. The songwriters of Ex Offender are Debbie and Gary Valentine. All right. Well, track 2, it looks like it was just written by Debbie Harry, according to Wikipedia in front of me. Little Girl Lies. What a little sassy ditty right there, right? Definitely bringing it's cool because you have that 50s thing, but then in her vocals you definitely got that punk and the New York City sass right there. So I feel like so much of who I became as a person is from listening to this album when I was 6 years old. When I got bullied in high school, I had that inner Debbie Harry that's like, fuck you, motherfuckers.
Yeah.
What do you guys think of Little Girl Lies?
Good guitar hooks.
Oh yeah.
Super vintagey. Like if that's not what they eventually wanted to be known for.
It's cool looking at these tracks because like some of the songs are 3 minutes, 2 minutes. So these are like perfect little retro pop songs. And I live in Florida, so when I'm driving to the beach a lot of times in the summer and like actually feeling good about life, this is an album I put on. It's one of the perfect albums for like the right feeling. I remember driving towards Madeira Beach. That's my favorite beach because it's kind of off the beaten path a little bit. And just listening to this album, even last year, like this is my go-to. So track 3. Anything else about Little Girl Lies? I think with this first album, a lot of the songs are just to be like, that's a badass song.
Yeah.
Once we get to more of the later albums, I think there's gonna be a little bit more to talk about the lyrics and stuff. In the Flesh was their first hit in Australia, I believe. I don't know if it went to number 1, but I know it was a big hit down under.
That song.
Such those background vocals, so beautiful.
Well, it's like a rare, like slow Blondie song, and it's such a sexy song. It really is. It's like one of their sexiest songs.
And just her voice like soaked in that reverb.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Yeah, it's so good. So good.
I think if I remember correctly, that they actually had Debbie had sang that song when she was still in the Stilettos.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that was her band before Blondie. And then they weren't called Blondie originally. I know they had a longer name, which I can't think of off the top of my head. And then eventually got shortened to Blondie.
If you guys want to take a look in the Blondie gig list that I've been working on since 1983, I have a lot of information in there, and I got the timeline accurate. And what it was is before Blondie, there was the Stilettos, and then they did just a very limited number of gigs where they were Angel and the Snake, and I think that was 3 shows, and then they did like 2 shows. I'm trying to remember this from memory. It's rough for me. I've had a hard year, but then they were Blondie and the Banzai Babies, and then they were just Blondie, and that occurred in 1974. And I have the exact dates if you want to look in the list. I'm working on an update for, I don't know, close to a year. I've been kind of working on this thing, and I haven't updated the public facing one yet, but I'm going to very soon. But I can send you you guys the link to my work in progress before it's published if you'd like.
I would love to, and I'll definitely read it before we do the second album so I can have a little bit more background.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. And thank you for doing all that, because I feel like if we don't preserve the history of bands, or a lot of the bands don't do it themselves, like who's going to do it? So
yeah, I remember when I first started working on it, that was a long time ago, long before I met them. And then I started to get a lot of information. And then when I met Chris and we became friends, he gave me access to his band member itineraries. And I told him about this project, and he was happy to share the information. And he said, but good luck with that. And here we are, many, many years, decades later. And Chris and their manager and the band members, they tell me, they've all told me that they refer to that list every day.
And Barry, just I don't want to call you out, but didn't you were involved in the box set, right? In the liner notes or something, right?
Yes, I was actually. Yeah. So in the box set, I wrote the software. They hired me actually to work on that. I wrote the software that created the foundation for the discography. So basically what I did was I downloaded the latest version of the entire album and record database from discogs.com, which was about a 40 gigabyte file. And I wrote software to go in and parse that whole entire thing and pull out all of the Blondie releases. And the input of that was the Discogs database. The output of it was all of the material that was in there that was Blondie's. And then we put it generated a spreadsheet, and it had the year in, and we filtered by year and removed the things that were later than 1982, because the box set was only from 1982 and earlier.
Right.
And then their manager, Tommy Manzi, he had graphic artists and so forth, the other people who were credited in there, took that list and they went and got all of the pictures that they were going to use for it, and they did their graphic design and constructed that book, the discography book, from what my software pulled out for them to generate the framework for it. And in addition to that, on that record, I did a lot of fact checking. I did the proofreading on the other book, and I helped identify some of the recordings that were used, that were the unreleased material, and I gave my input into what I thought would be important to include on that, and what of the original tapes that they had, that they should invest in getting them baked, where they dehydrate the tapes and then digitizing the tapes. And that's where a lot of that material originated.
Wow. Well, thank you for all it's a beautiful box set. When it came out, I spent a lot of time with it. I'm a CD guy, so I didn't get the discography book because it only came with the vinyl. So, I always look for like a standalone one on eBay if anyone breaks up their box set.
Yeah, keep looking. It's possible that that'll happen at some point.
Yeah. All
And
right.
I think they do intend to take that, my gig list and the discography, and at some point there's a project in the works that may have a web-based version where you can basically browse through Blondie's entire timeline. And now, because of research that I've done, and that so many contributors to the gig list, there's probably close to 100 different people have contributed. They read it, they write in, they bring their personal information that they had from journals and all kinds of stuff. People contribute to get the band's timeline nailed down exactly. And like one of the things that we're really proud of in working on that timeline and the gig list is we found the actual ad that landed Clem Burke's job in Blondie.
Oh, wow. Holy
Yeah,
shit.
because remember, if you look back and see what people wrote in magazines through the years or decades, and even people who've written books about Blondie's history, like that really great one that Chris Needs wrote, they didn't even know. Like they talked about the ad where they talked about the Freak Energy drummer, but nobody actually found the physical ad. But between the research that I did and a physicist friend of mine, Michelle Shin, she actually went to the New York Public Library and looked at microfilm of
Holy
the
shit.
Village Voice and found the ad. And it's in the gig list. It's March 10th, 1975, I think, is when they ran the ad.
It's very cool.
Now, was Freak Energy drummer, you said, was that the ad they placed?
Debbie and Chris placed that ad and included their phone number. And the one way that we knew absolutely that we'd found it is the phone number matched Blondie's resume from 1974, which Chris gave me a copy of early on in our friendship. And there's a copy of that you can see in the gig list.
Wow.
It's just a great description. Freak Energy.
Yeah, Clem Burke, one of the best drummers ever. And when he does a fill, like, it's a Clem fill, right? Oh. So in the Flesh, there were some background singers on there who were legendary background singers, right? Al Greenwich, Mickey Harris, and Hilda Harris were the background singers on In the Flesh and Man Overboard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Ellie Greenwich, she is in a couple of the albums doing background. I don't remember exactly which ones, but I think she was still contributing all the way up to E to the Beat, I believe.
Because she has a distinctive voice, and I know that voice shows up later in the discography. All right. So any other thoughts on In the Flesh before we continue on the album? Just a beautiful song. Definitely a thumbs up, right?
Yes.
All right. Look Good in Blue, a track written by Jimmy Destry. I imagine he wrote that with Debbie in mind to sing it, with, of course, the controversial line, I'll give you some head, ... and shoulders to lie. I'm like, I just feel like this is one good song after another. This song is so much fun. I like that's kind of minor key, but still, makes you want to move and groove. Another great song. A lot. I feel like a shitty host. I love these songs so much. I don't have much more to say than like, I love this fucking song.
That's good enough reason to get together and do it.
Yeah. Do you all have anything to say about Look Good in Blue?
I have the dorkiest thing to say about this song. It's so stupid. It's such a dumb admission. But so, of course, I was really young when I first heard this song. I was like maybe like 11. And I wasn't really thinking about like, give you some head. Like I heard Head and Shoulders like the shampoo. And so I thought that was them being like clever. And so every time I hear that song, I immediately think of a bottle of Head and Shoulders shampoo.
Well, that whole song is the ultimate double entendre, so right?
It's like a dumb thing to picture. I love the song. I mean, it's like, but like I immediately, I'm sure I'm not the only one because I mean, I'm sure like they knew what they were doing. Like,
You know, the unsung hero of the song is the bridge when the I'm tired, I'm so tired, when it goes into the major key. And, you know, I just think the song is great. And then it gets even better once it gets that bridge with the Debbie's background vocals. And then you have the guitar solo. This is like 2 minutes and 56 seconds of heaven, in my opinion.
Dun, 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 dun. I like that.
And then when you think things couldn't get any better, then fucking In the Sun is next, which is probably like one of my favorite Blondie songs of all time. The synthesizer on there, the organ, Debbie's vocals. To me,
it's very that song that In the Sun is very like it's like very Ramones, you know. It's like it's very much like from like, I think because it's like I said that there is like, you know, this album has like a lot of foreshadowing for like other, like, you know, other songs would be foreshadowing like their forays into like funk and like other things, but like In the Sun definitely has that, like, you know, because like that CBGB's, you know, vibe of like, you know, like where they came from, like, you know, like that whole scene, you know, like it just has that Ramones sound, you know. It's like very like power punk type of thing, you know.
and like I'm kind of a, not to be like candid, but I'm kind of a little bit of a depressed person by nature. I have that northern melancholy in my bones, and this is one of the songs that, like, you know, I don't need medication. I just need In the Sun. The song really does put me in a good place, and I never bothered to look up the lyrics. I just sing along, whatever. What does she say? I'm Pakalaka girl. I don't know what she says, and I don't need to because I have my own words. But this song,
That would have been a good reference for tomorrow on 420.
oh, okay,
That's what that's a referencing.
perfect, even better.
I feel like the Ramones song Sheena is a punk rocker. If Sheena was listening to some music, she'd be listening to In the Sun, but that would be on her playlist.
Sheena definitely would listen to In the Sun.
She would.
One of my favorite Blondie songs of all time. It makes this is a thing in the world that brings me joy in a world that can be very joyless. Not to be too depressing. Any other thoughts on this song?
Amongst musicians, I don't think you can be too depressing.
Yeah.
It's part of the gig.
All right, and Chris Stein was the sole songwriter for In the Sun, so you know we have a lot of various contributions and collaborations here.
Interesting.
Side 1 ends with a song written by Jimmy Destry, A Shark in Jet's Clothing. So this is more of a storyteller song. What do you guys think of this one?
I'll speak it.
Yeah, this is another one. This is one of those things, like, I listen to the whole album as a body of work.
Yeah, and I think, like you said on the last song, you're starting to, in my ear, I'm starting to hear like moving towards the 80s, more synthesizer. It's coming in, it's coming in, it's coming in as the songs progress.
Barry, do you have any thoughts on this one? Oh, now you can't hear me. All right, so then
I could hear you. Sorry, I was doing something else. I was actually inviting my girlfriend Stephanie to join us.
Oh yes, please join us.
I don't even know if she's home, but we'll see.
Is she a Blondie fan as well?
Oh, you bet. We actually met at a Blondie gig 11 years ago.
I love some Blondie romance.
So it was 13 years ago.
So that would have been 2000. That would have been as we're gearing up for 2009.
In August, we met. And I was like, you know, do you want to come backstage and hang out, meet the band? And I had a big group that day. I got yelled at by the tour manager for not telling them that I was bringing 12 people. And anyway, we had a great time. We hit it off, had a lot of musical just chemistry, and eventually we started dating, and you know, we're still together. So we've been a lot of shows together.
I'd love to have her on this or any Blondie podcast. I love some Blondie romance. That would have been as we were gearing into the Panic of Girls era, right?
Yeah, was right around there. Yep.
Which is an album I love. I just want to say that I love some of the later Blondie albums as much as the early ones. So I'm here for this whole ride.
I do have a question about this song. So I'm looking at the lyrics, and I actually have always wondered what they mean when they say, "Don't go out DTK." What does that mean? You don't wear those clothes again. They don't make it in this crowd. Don't go out DTK.
I think it means down to kill, something like that, and it's a reference, I think, to the New York Dolls. I wasn't familiar with the reference either. I asked Chris once.
Oh, really? Oh, okay, yeah, because I actually remember. I've always wondered like what they meant by that.
I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of wondering.
I didn't know what she was saying too. I thought she was just saying, "Don't go out, did it again." Like I didn't know what she was.
I think if we all sang along this album, we'd all have our own lyrics, our own version of the lyrics. All right, so then we move over to side 2, Man Overboard. The background singers are back. Man Overboard, singing in the sea of love. That's me. It's had a bad one about 2 weeks ago. So Man Overboard, looking for my raft right now, looking for the lifeboat. Great organ solo on this song, right? And it says it was just written by Debbie Harry.
The band's so tight.
Yeah.
Again, first album, and like just everything in hindsight is crystal clear, but such tight players, and it's just that's what I think. Because this one, at least at the beginning, there's some things are subdued, so you can actually hear everyone,
right?
And it's just really tight.
And then the thing I love about this album is I kind of like the more lo-fi feeling of it.
Yeah,
I like some of the more slick productions later on with Mike Chapman, but I love this album. This is probably one of my favorite Blondie albums, honestly. Like I just play it from beginning to end and love every minute of it, and then do it again. Then I'd play it again, and then again. Like you can just play it over and over, and when you're driving to the beach and letting go of the pain of life. Well, next, back in 1994, this guy I like started dating this girl I didn't like, and I used to drive around and play Rip Her to Shreds in my car and drive by their house. Debbie Harry at her, her most sassy. She's being a little fierce. Written by Chris Stein and Debbie Harry. There's a little bit of that punk here, but this song is so freaking good. And I just love, we get more mature as we age, but I like listening to the song and just slipping back to my immature, bitchy 21-year-old self, driving by a girl's house and giving the middle finger. What do you guys think of Rip Her to Shreds? Yeah, you know her.
A lot of attitude.
And it's, it's, I like too, because that, and I just looked at it again, like, I like, because knowing Debbie Harry, I mean, she's actually such a sweet person, like when you meet her, like she's such a nice lady. And so she wouldn't be like actually actively singing about like, oh, rip this specific person to shreds. It's like not her personality. So it's like I was happy to find out that it was actually about gossip columnists, like, and like what they do, like to like when they're ripping apart people, like, and it's actually more about, oh, will you look at that hair, like, and how we still do it. I mean, like how like nothing's really changed. I mean, like if anything, it's gotten worse. But and that was nice to find out, because it's like I could never picture Debbie Harry, like, because when I first heard it when I was a little kid, I pictured like Debbie Harry like at some party, like what I pictured a party being like, that adults would have, and like her like being like, oh, look at that girl, like just rip her to shreds. But it just didn't seem like her personality. Like that
my friends, is the difference between our Debbie and our Madonna, right? Because Madonna would be the one to rip her to shreds. Not our Debbie, though.
So yeah, I was happy to hear that it was actually about like, like tabloids and stuff. So
All right. Does anyone else want to comment on this one? Next, we're moving to the rifle range. And you know what I love about this song in the background vocals?
Yeah.
It's so freaking good, man.
yeah, I like this song a lot.
It's interesting because on these early Blondie albums, some of the subject matters are just, especially when you get to Plastic Letters, like you go to Red Square, I'm on E, we have the rifle range here, we're about to do some Kung Fu Girls. Like there's a lot of like B movie stuff.
Yep.
Which I love. Another singer I love, Josie Cotton, came out with an album of B movie songs that I loved a few years ago. And
she's amazing.
Yeah, I'm trying to get her to come on the podcast and talk about her albums with her, because I think her albums are amazing. And I think that's something that people need to know about Blondie is they had their hit songs, but I consider Blondie an albums band. Like their albums, they have a lot of classic albums that are good from beginning to end. There was no filler on a Blondie album for a lot of albums, in my opinion. And even those albums that had the filler had so many strong songs beyond the singles. So that's why I'm excited to, especially some of the later albums, to really talk about what great songwriters and stuff they are.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me without me pressing a button?
Now I can hear you.
You can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay, I don't really know how to use this, but I don't know if I have to push that button on another screen here. But anyway, I want to mention that song Rifle Range was written by Ronnie Toast, who is a very close friend of Clem. And I met him quite a few times. I knew him fairly well. He was very often backstage because Clem always made sure that he was backstage at every show that he could get to.
Aww.
And he was from New Jersey. He died a couple of years ago, but I remember back in the day when he wrote those songs, that he got his nickname because he accidentally burnt his parents' house down, and then he went back and spray painted on the wall Toast. And then Debbie used to talk about him when she would sing Rifle Range in really early recordings, and she would say Toast is the most, even when he's burnt. But Clem was really, really close with Ronnie. He was always backstage at any show in the Northeast, like around New Jersey and so forth, and a real nice guy. He unfortunately had a pretty bad accident long ago, long before I met him in the early 2000s. He fell asleep on railroad tracks and lost his legs when a train was crazy. But Clem always took care of him backstage. It was great.
That's the thing I like about Blondie is, I don't know them personally like you do, but they always just seem like good people that just want to lift those up around them.
Oh, you bet.
Whether it's a collaborator or a friend or a fan, you can hear it in the music. Like they're just good people.
One of the things about them is they're very down to earth, and especially Clem and Chris, really, and Debbie too. They're very down to earth people. They're very generous, and that's what they always say. Like Clem is always like, we're all really down to earth, and that was one of the things that always appealed to me, not only as them as a band and in their interviews, but as them as people. When I finally got to know them well.
So if they tune into our podcast, I'll put out the invitation. If they all want to jump on and talk about each song for 20 minutes each, we're here for it.
Well, that would be great. I wish that they would be able to do that. They have a gig right now, probably right about this time in LA tonight.
Next time.
And then day after tomorrow, they're doing Coachella again, and then off to England and Cardiff.
Wow. All right. So after Rifle Range, Kung Fu Girls, that was Debbie, Gary Valentine, and Jimmy Destry all rolled this one together. So another B movie throwback. What a fuck! And this is another one that has a little bit of that Ramones vibe to me.
Yeah, it does. I think I like about Blondie too is like a lot of their songs are like story songs.
Yeah,
Like they actually like tell like these little mini stories, which is rare because we have so many songs now. Like we have a dearth of songs that are just kind of like about people's feelings, like I'm writing a love song and I see the moon in your eyes and a lot of but like they are actually like on all their albums, there's like these songs that like tell these like really random stories. Which are just like even like later on, like on like albums like The Hunter, like there's like songs like Dragonfly about some weird interstellar like like space race, like I mean there's just like these weird songs that they're on all the albums like that, but then they still have songs that are kind of more like traditional like love song type of things, or not really, but then there's just these weird songs like Kung Fu Girl about this character,
I think,
Or giant bats from space.
or yeah, exactly, giant ants from space.
I think Debbie Harry is such a great lyricist. Even some of the later Blondie albums, like one of my favorite Blondie songs is actually Mother from Panic at Girls. And she's writing about a club from the 90s and being nostalgic about the 90s. And I love that her pool of inspiration, went beyond the 70s, went beyond the 80s.
And Mother, actually, weirdly enough, that club is where Jackie 60 was, where I got to perform with her.
Oh,
so bizarre,
Yet, Barry, you missed the story, and you'll hear it if you watch the podcast. Daniel got to play a song with Debbie at a Patti Smith tribute in 1990.
Yeah, my first ever show playing in New York, I got to. The club, the people, Johnny and Chi-Chi were like, "Oh, you should come play the Patti Smith song." And so I played Redondo Beach, and they were like, "Can you back up Debbie?" I didn't even know who they were talking about. Can you play Free Money? And I was like, "Yeah." And I was like 21 or something at the time. And so when I got there and they shoved me in a broom closet with this woman to learn the song, I realized it was Debbie Harry, and I flipped out.
Oh,
That's really amazing.
Yeah, it was awesome. Awesome.
All right. Does anyone else have anything to say about Kung Fu Girl? Scott, anything from you?
Sorry about that. No, in general, I'm still curious, and I think I'm talking to the right people to learn some things here. If she co-wrote something, do you think she had more pen to the paper on lyrics and creating that story that you were talking about? Or could that have been other people in the band as well?
I always thought Debbie
almost always was writing lyrics, and Chris or the others were almost always writing the music.
And Barry, would you say Debbie did the melodies too, right? On top of the music?
My next question. Yep.
I don't actually know enough about music to be able to answer that question.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised, though. I mean, I know a little about music, but pretty much all I know about it is that I love it. But
yeah,
yeah.
I'm going to go out on a limb, and I know the least about this band of anyone here for sure, but I would go out on a limb and say I would bet she more or less constructed those melodies, because it's a style that's consistent across these different songwriters that
right.
That were
even when you go into some of her solo albums, there's such like the signature Debbie Harry like lyric and melody that's so signature and so good. Some of her lyrics are just unbelievably intelligent. Like this was intelligent. Some of the songs on this first album are kind of character sketches that are a little bit more fun, but when you get in some of the later works, there's just a lot of depth and intelligence. You could tell just what a genius they all are.
She's one of those singers who doesn't waste notes.
Right.
Everything in those melodies is just where it should be.
Right. It counts.
No missed opportunity.
So, we went to the rifle range. We hung out with some Kung Fu girls, and the album ends with an attack of the giant ants, which does it get any more B movie than that? You even get the sound effects
Yeah, you get that great interlude in the middle where like everything stops and it's like you get to go to the movies in the middle of the the song.
No, like I said, I think I got this on when I was 6 or 7 years old, and this song kind of like, it was kind of, I don't want to say scary, but it definitely took me on a trip as a little kid.
And
then
it
you
has
have
weird sing-songy thing that they keep la 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 like and then they eat your face la la la
Yeah.
la. It's like
I always put this song in the same, like sometimes you know how you put songs in categories, and I always put this in like the category of like scary Blondie songs. I put this with like cautious lip from Classic Letters. And another Blondie song that I thought was scary when I was a kid was Victor from Eat to the Beat.
love that song.
Yeah. Oh,
Good one.
and Scott, let me ask this. Have you heard all the Blondie albums? Or are you going to kind of listen as you go and familiarize yourself? Like, are you going to be discovering some new stuff as we go along?
Well, absolutely, but I've gone through everything except for the much later. I'm not there yet. I'm kind of
Okay.
staying in the 70s right now. I haven't spent as much time with this first album as the second and third.
Okay. Cool.
But
Well,
but I have listened to
this is such a interesting end to the album. Definitely I feel like they didn't go as B film again, and that's kind of what the charm is of this album, I feel like.
Mhm.
Again, I like hearing, debut albums are so important, and there's always or almost always some you can still hear all the influences. If they're going to fade out, they're going to fade out later.
Right.
But this is kind of the moment to hear what everybody was bringing and get a strong sense of maybe what motivated them in the first place.
And I do think the album is more raw than some of the later ones, and they're kind of figuring out who they are, but the Blondie character that Debbie had created was fully formed, I feel like. Like I feel like the band arrived as a fully formed band. They would change and they'd grow. But this is a killer debut album. Great.
Killer band.
So well, cool. It was our first podcast. We're all getting to know each other and we're getting to know the band. But I always end the podcast with ranking the album on a scale of 1 to 10. That is the tradition. And let me think. I'll go first since I'm you know what? I'm going to wait. Scott, since you're the newest to Blondie, what do you rank this album on a scale of 1 to 10?
Against their other albums or just standalone as an.
Just standalone in the history of music or however you want to do it.
Oh, I don't like doing this.
It's hard, isn't it?
I don't like who's better best. I hate those.
Let's do it. Let's do it against their other albums then in the Blondie
Okay.
universe.
From everything I've listened to, it wouldn't be my favorite.
Okay.
From the second, third, fourth album.
All right, Daniel, what do you rank this one?
I'm not gonna rank it like the numbers. Like I'm gonna do what he does. I have to say like where it ranks in compare like it's not
Relative
my
to
absolute
their
favorite album, although it has some of my favorite tracks. It's really hard for me to say like what my favorite like just saying like one of my favorite like songs ever from Blondie is actually off the 100, which a lot of people like don't like that album, and it's
Right.
like but it has the Orchid Club on it, which is like one of their most beautiful songs ever. And so it's like so this album I think is very it's very focused, which I like. And the thing that I like also about it, it's funny I mentioned like there's a lot of foreshadowing of what's to come. Like you can see already that even though they came up from one thing I will say about this album is that even though they came up from the whole CBGB's punk rock, like that like kind of rock and roll scene, they're experimenting already on this first album.
Yep.
Bunch of different styles. You hear them doing like the tribal drums that you're gonna hear on like later things. Like even the Orchid Club. Like you hear them like already getting into like we mentioned Man Overboard. Like like funk and like, like almost like urban feel type of stuff. Like
Mhm.
they're like already experimenting with like different styles of music. They're not just doing like I mentioned, like, in the sun, like that has this Ramones vibe. It would have been really easy for Blondie to just make this album that. Like
Right.
this is like a punk rock, like fun retro, like garage band, like like Sheena is a punk rocker type of album, and it would have been really easy, and it still would have been a great album. Like, because I'm sure they could have filled up in a whole album, but they didn't do that. They actually had like a lot of other styles that they were doing too, and then like all these references to like weird characters and B movies, and like taking us to the rifle range and like all these different places. So it kind of is all over the map. Like most Blondie albums are, which is the other reason why I love Blondie, because like they really do go all over the map with their like.
Right.
So this album, that on first listen you kind of think, well, it's just this one thing. It's like this retro, kind of like garage rock type of throwback with like organs and like very like kind of girl group Shangri-La's type of thing. Yeah. But no, there's a lot more stuff going on it. So I love this album. It's one of like I love all the Blondie albums, but there's some that I like a little more just for personal reasons, but I would put this album on anytime and have a great time listening to it.
Yeah. We have a new joiner right at the end, which I love. Barry, is this your girlfriend joining us?
I can't tell. It just says connecting. So
Okay.
I don't know, but I would imagine it might be.
Cool.
Oh, and while I'm unmuted myself, I'm going to have to go with, as a rating for this, all of my children are above average.
I love it. What are any thoughts on this album? As any closing thoughts on where it sits in the Blondie universe for you?
For me personally, I think there's a lot of gems, personal favorites off of there. It's exceptional as far as I'm concerned for a debut album. I'm usually not a particularly good fan of debut albums for most bands. It is, I don't know, it's sort of in the middle, I guess. I don't really have any least favorites. I know that The Hunter is often down on the bottom of the list, especially tends to be with really young people. It also has some real gems, and yes, the shout out to Orchid Club is spectacular.
You know, else I loved from that album was what is it called? Dance Way or Dan? I love that song.
Yeah, that's a Destry compilation.
Yeah,
and it has Island of Lost Souls.
I like Island of Lost Souls.
Such a good song.
You know what? Hashtag justice for the Hunter.
Just
when we get off the recording here, I'll tell you guys a couple of anecdotes about that album, since it's going to be quite some time before we actually get to it.
Yeah, I'll do the closing, then we can pause and chat for a minute. Okay, this was our debut episode, and we're all getting to know each other, but I am so thankful that I got to spend an hour and a half of my life talking about Blondie's first album, and I'm excited to talk about everyone. I love, of course, Parallel Lines, Each the Beat, but I also love Ghost the Download. I love Pollinator. I love Panic of Girls. So I'm excited. I hope you all join me for the whole ride, and it'll be cool if we have some friends jump in and out throughout the journey, but thanks to Patreon, thanks to the subscribers, and most of all to Blondie for changing all of our lives. Like, I don't think our lives would be what it is without the music of Blondie. So we will be back next month with Plastic Letters.